All right, let's dive in. Today, we're heading back to ancient Rome, to the legendary rebellion of Spartacus. You've been asking us to focus on the lessons, not just the battles. So we're going beyond, the sandals and swords, and really try to uncover the wisdom in this story.
Yeah, Spartacus's rebellion, it really is like a master class in leadership and strategy.
Yeah.
We'll be looking at how he used moral authority, how he brought together a diverse group of people, and the power of symbolism, stuff that's still relevant today even.
Totally. But to really understand Spartacus, you got to picture Rome at its peak, but also that dark side. Rome was a society built on slavery, like completely dependent on it. Enslaved people weren't just laborers. They were gladiators forced to fight in these brutal arenas.
Right, and that's important because Spartacus wasn't just fighting for himself. He was challenging the entire system. And he did it all starting with basically kitchen knives. He led this crazy escape from a gladiator school in Capua with 70 other guys.
That escape, back in 73 BC, that was just the beginning. What started as this desperate run for freedom, well, it turned into a rebellion that shook the Roman Republic. But let's get to what you all really want to know. What can we learn? What made Spartacus such a powerful leader?
That's the cool part. One of his biggest strengths, moral authority. See, he wasn't like a lot of rebel leaders driven by power or personal gain. Spartacus fought for everyone oppressed by Rome. That resonated with people, inspired incredible loyalty and brought in all kinds of followers.
Makes you think, right? Would he have been as successful if it was just about him? Did his selflessness actually make him more influential?
Tough to say for sure. But think about today's leaders who are fighting for social justice. They often have a different kind of following. One based on deep trust that goes beyond just charisma.
So it's not just giving orders, it's about embodying the values you're fighting for. Which brings us to another interesting thing about Spartacus, uniting all these different people under one goal. His army was a mix of escaped slaves, gladiators, people from all over the Roman world. Different cultures, languages, you name it.
Instead of letting those differences divide them, Spartacus tapped into their shared experience of oppression. He understood that everyone just wanted to be free. I mean, if he could bring together a group that diverse back then, what does that tell us about building unity today? Especially now, when the world feels so divided.
Right, it's powerful. Shared values, it can really bridge even the deepest divides. But unity alone doesn't win wars, especially against someone like Rome. We got to talk strategy. One lesson that stands out is the danger of overextending. Spartacus had this huge decision: escape over the Alps to freedom, or keep fighting in Italy. What happened there?
Well, initially, escaping Rome was the goal. But as the rebellion grew, so did this thirst for vengeance among his followers. Many wanted to stay and strike back, even though it was risky.
So revenge clouded their judgment.
Yeah, classic example of how emotions can mess up your strategy. By overextending, they ended up in a fight they couldn't win, going up against the full force of the Roman legions.
Like that saying, sometimes retreating is the best way to advance. Even when you're winning, you have to know when to pull back, when to be strategic. That applies to everyone, right? Knowing when to push, when to hold back.
Oh, absolutely. Business, relationships, personal goals.
Yeah.
Understanding your limits and knowing when to regroup can be the key.
Spartacus's rebellion, it was crushed in the end. But his story didn't end there. He became this symbol, this inspiration. Why do you think his story resonated so much even after his death?
That's where it goes beyond just history. It becomes a legend. He represented the fight against tyranny, the desire for freedom. Even in defeat, his story gave hope to those who were oppressed and became a symbol for anyone wanting change.
It's amazing how someone who never held any political office could become such a powerful symbol of revolution and resistance, and for centuries too.
Symbols, they're powerful. They capture emotions, ideas that go beyond language, even time. Which leads to another big lesson: shaping your own narrative. After Spartacus died, Rome tried to rewrite history, make him the bad guy. But his story lived on. Why?
Well, some stories are just too powerful to be silenced. But was there more to it than that?
See, Spartacus, by fighting for freedom and justice, he made sure his story would be told from the perspective of the oppressed. He became a symbol of hope that Rome couldn't erase. That control over his narrative is something all leaders should think about.
So even though he lost the actual battles, he won the war of ideas. The battle for hearts and minds, you could say. And that victory, well, it echoes through history.
Absolutely, and we're still learning from it today. It really shows you the power of ideas, of ideals. Rome tried to erase them, but Spartacus's message, that message of freedom and equality, it just wouldn't die. And it still speaks to us today, as we try to figure out justice, equality. These are still issues.
They are. But let's go back to Spartacus's tactics for a minute. It's easy to talk about unity, moral authority, all that.
Yeah.
But how did he actually take a small band of escaped gladiators and turn them into an army that could challenge Rome? How did that happen?
Well, Spartacus, he was a brilliant military strategist. He was a master of what we call asymmetrical warfare. He knew he couldn't beat the legions head on, so he used what he had. His army was fast, he knew the terrain, so he used those to his advantage. Quick strikes, hit-and-run tactics, ambushing Roman patrols, it's like David and Goliath, using speed and agility to outmaneuver a bigger, slower opponent.
So instead of huge battles, he kept the Romans on edge, wearing them down. Any specific examples that really stand out?
Oh, yeah. The Battle of Mount Vesuvius, early in the rebellion. Spartacus and his forces were trapped on the slopes of the volcano. A Roman legion had them cornered. Surrender, no way, fight uphill, hopeless. What did Spartacus do? He used vines, rappelled down the side of the mountain at night, the unguarded side, of course, then bam, surprise attack on the Romans from behind, routed them, captured a ton of their equipment. It wasn't just that he won, it showed how clever he was, and it completely demoralized the Romans. Plus, inspired others to join his cause.
Wow. Turning a total disaster into a major victory. That kind of thinking, that boldness, it must have drawn people to him. It wasn't just about freedom, it was believing that even an empire, Rome, could be beaten.
Exactly. His early victories proved Rome could be vulnerable. It had a huge effect on morale for the rebels and the Romans. Those wins let Spartacus build his army, escaped slaves, the poor who were suffering under Roman rule, even some Romans who were disillusioned, they all joined him. They saw him as a force for change.
So he was tapping into this, like, undercurrent of unrest, almost by accident. His rebellion, it became a magnet for anyone who felt oppressed.
That's a good way to put it. It shows what happens when a leader understands the desires, the frustrations of the people. But victories, they don't last forever. And even the best strategists, they face setbacks. We have to talk about the turning point in Spartacus's rebellion.
You mean Marcus Licinius Crassus, the Roman general who eventually put down the rebellion?
Yeah, Crassus was a different kind of enemy. Ruthless, disciplined, and rich. Really rich. He knew Spartacus was dangerous, not just to the army, but to Roman society itself. And he brought this brutality to the fight. Like, he brought back decimation. That's where every 10th man in a Roman unit that messed up, showed cowardice, got executed by their own comrades. It was savage, but man, did it enforce discipline.
I can't even imagine that, the psychological effect of that. But Crassus was a good military leader too, right?
Oh yeah, he was skilled. Unlike the Roman commanders before him, Crassus saw that Spartacus was smart. He didn't underestimate him. So, Crassus, he played to Rome's strengths. But he also figured out how to counter Spartacus's guerrilla tactics. He focused on pinning the rebel army down. Cut off their supplies, stop them from moving around freely. He was slowly squeezing the life out of the rebellion.
Turning Spartacus's tactics against him. So what does Spartacus do? Did he try a new approach?
He was in a tough spot. Keep up the hit and run, sure, but that would just delay things. His army was getting smaller. He had to choose, escape Italy while he still could, or risk it all, one final showdown.
And we know the ending. He chose to fight. What made him make that decision?
We can only guess. Maybe he thought escape was impossible with Crassus on his tail, or maybe he believed one big victory could change everything, give his people a chance to bargain for their freedom. It was a huge gamble, trying to beat fate. The last stand was near the Silarus River in southern Italy.
So after years of defying Rome, Spartacus made his last stand. That final battle, what was it like?
It's mostly myth and legend, but we know it was brutal. Spartacus's army, totally outnumbered, fought with everything they had. They knew this was it, last chance. But the Roman legions, led by Crassus, they were just too strong. The rebellion was crushed.
And Spartacus, what happened to him? Did he die fighting? Captured?
Nobody knows for sure. Some stories say he died in the middle of the battle, leading his men to the very end. Others say he was wounded, captured, and then executed. They never found his body, which just adds to the mystery, to the legend.
So even in death, he escaped Rome, in a way. It's a fitting end to an amazing life. It's amazing, right? He loses, but Spartacus becomes this symbol of resistance, one of the most enduring in history. What is it about his story all these centuries later that still grabs us?
I think it's because he represents something, well, universal. The fight against being oppressed, the struggle for freedom, that belief that a better world is out there. He gives a voice to those who don't have one, those who've been used, exploited.
We've been talking about the big lessons, from the rebellion. But let's get specific. Are there moments, decisions from his campaign that really show these lessons in action?
Oh, absolutely. Let's rewind to that escape from Capua. Remember, Spartacus and the other gladiators, they had nothing. Kitchen stuff and desperation, that's it. They break out of that gladiator school. They were outmatched, but they weren't giving up. That defiance, that risk, it gave hope to others suffering under Roman rule.
Courage, determination, they could be powerful even when it seems like you've got no chance. But escaping, that was just step one. Spartacus had to turn that spark into a movement. How'd he do that?
One clever thing he did, how he brought in the newly freed slaves into his army. He didn't treat them like they were lower, trained them right alongside his experienced gladiators, created this feeling of like camaraderie, everyone working together for the same goal. He broke down those social barriers, even within his own ranks.
So it wasn't just an army, it was a community, a society built on equality, respect.
That's pretty visionary, creating that kind of unity from such a diverse group. But Spartacus wasn't just a charismatic guy, right? He was a strategic genius. Can you give us some example of his tactics?
One thing he really understood was logistics, supply lines. He knew that the Roman legions, yeah, they were powerful, but they needed a constant flow of supplies. So he went after those supply lines, raided their convoys, disrupted their whole system. This not only weakened the Romans, it gave Spartacus the resources he needed.
He was like a chess player, wasn't he? Always thinking ahead, finding those weak spots. But we talked about it before, even the best plans, they can go wrong. Bad decisions, things you don't see coming.
Right, and for Spartacus, that was the decision to stay and fight in Italy. He had the chance to escape over the Alps, but as the rebellion grew, they wanted revenge. Spartacus, his followers, they all got caught up in that. The hope of crushing Rome, it clouded their judgment.
I get it. Years of suffering, the need to fight back, to make Rome pay, it must have been intense. It shows how dangerous it is to let emotions control your strategy. Sometimes the hardest thing, the smartest thing, is to retreat, to regroup, live to fight another day. And that brings us to Spartacus's legacy. He lost the war, but in a way, he won something else.
His name, it means rebellion, it means resistance. How did he do that? Rome tried to wipe him from history.
It's the power of ideas, of symbols. Spartacus, he embodied freedom, equality, standing up for what's right. He became more than just a person. He became this symbol, bigger than time, bigger than place. Every generation that fights for justice, they see themselves in Spartacus.
So even though he died, he's still fighting, in a way. Still inspiring resistance.
Yeah.
Thousands of years later.
Exactly. It shows that hope never dies. Humans, we crave freedom. It's part of who we are.
It's a call to action, isn't it?
Yeah.
We all have a bit of Spartacus in us, I think. Just waiting.
That might be the biggest lesson here. The spirit of Spartacus, it's in all of us. That spark of defiance, wanting justice, believing in a better world. It's up to us to keep that fire going.
Well said. And thanks to everyone for joining us on this deep dive into the incredible story of Spartacus. We hope you've learned something new, not just about history, but about leadership, courage, and that fight for a more just world.